Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of College of the Dead, publisher of more than 1,000 independent comic books, publisher extraordinaire. But today we are talking about DC Comics. We're talking about comic book stores. Is this really the end of comic book stores? Well, the truth is nobody really knows, but it's looking pretty terrible for comic book stores right now. I will tell you why. First things first, subscribe. Make sure you click the bell for notifications. It's a huge help. All right. This article talks about DC Comics using other distribution methods to get to comic book stores. And when I mean distribution methods, they mean for delivering their comic books. Now, Diamond Comic Distributors closed down, as most people know, at least temporarily. And it probably is temporarily. Diamond Comic Distributors really works almost like a shipping service. They don't act like a distributor in the sense of how a lot of distributors act. So a lot of distributors, what they would do is they would purchase stuff outright. They would buy books, magazines, toys, things like that. Well, not magazines, to be honest with you, but books, collectibles, merchandise to then resell to customers. Diamond just takes pre-orders for these things, non-returnable pre-orders, and then sends them on to collectible stores after the merchandise comes in. Distributors in other industries will hold inventory at their own risk and then get it to the most efficient place where their customers are at. So if a distributor, let's say, buys 1,000 boxes of pencils, whatever it might be, they would buy them from the manufacturer and then they would sell that inventory over time. Diamond works where they very, very rapidly turn over everything that comes in. They don't buy stuff to hold on to it to then resell over, let's say, the space of a couple of months. Their business model and the direct comic market business model to serve comic book stores has been to buy things that they know are pre-sold and guaranteed to be bought by retailers, comic book stores or the retailers, and then immediately turn them over. And then for the most part, comic book stores assume all the risk of reselling those comics, and they usually buy them for example, $1 to sell them for $2. Now prices are higher on comics, so maybe they're buying them for $2.50 to sell for $5. And in a lot of cases, they don't even get as much of a discount as that. From that, comic book stores are supposed to pay for all their expenses, all their overhead, as well as eat the losses on any comic books that are unsold. That's the basic business model for comic book stores. So with Diamond Comics shut down over the coronavirus, where it's a very severe shutdown, where they announced that they will not accept new orders for comics, books, toys, things that they agreed to buy on a non-returnable basis. They won't even accept things they already ordered, much less take orders for new stuff. That's extreme. You know, I've known Diamond Comic Distributors for 30 years. I know Steve Jeppe, who owns Diamond Comic Distributors. They're doing their best, but it's a very, very difficult time for Diamond Comic Distributors and for the retail stores and for the whole industry making comics, except for people that are crowdfunding. So that said, of all the years I've known Diamond Comics, one of the things you could always count on, I could always count on when I first got into publishing in a serious way in 1990, was that Diamond would always be there for me and would always have the check when I needed it. And they never missed a day. They never missed a beat. Always super dependable. So this kind of a shock is something Diamond has never had before. No one in the industry has ever dealt with before. So just so you understand, hurricanes, floods, whatever, earthquakes, Diamond has always been like the bank of the comic book industry, taking care of business and getting comic books out. Now everything seems to be a bit confused, and it's really not Diamond's fault. A lot of people don't understand and don't know that Diamond, while they are a very important part of the direct comic book system, they don't tell people what to do. So not only they're not the publisher, they're not actually the distributor for DC Comics or for Marvel or for Image. They have an agency relationship, and agency relationship basically meaning they're not assuming the financial risk if a store doesn't pay. They also don't get the discounts. They don't make as much money on books. They don't set the discounts for the retailers. That's decided by the publishers for the major accounts, but by the publishers who are taking the financial risk. They almost work like a sales rep. Now, this was true as of the mid 1990s. I have not heard anything about it changing, and I'm going to assume it's still true because really what happened was in the early 1990s, comic books exploded in success. Millions of copies of some books were getting out there, and frankly, Diamond made a ton of money reshipping books, and so did a couple of the other comic book distributors. Capital City Distributors was a major distributor. They were based out of Madison, Wisconsin, and they were making so much money they really didn't even know what the hell to do with it. I went to visit their new headquarters back in the day in like 1994. It was massive. It was just ridiculous. And they just started hiring vice presidents to do crazy things that they had just had nothing to do. They just were spending tons and tons of cash. And when there was a distribution problem, when Marvel Comics bought out Heroes World to control their own distribution, things started falling apart for the industry, and that buyout didn't work well for Marvel. Incidentally, Marvel was owned by financier Ronald Perlman, and he had a lot of success with buying out distribution companies with his cosmetics company, Revlon. That actually worked very well for Revlon, and that's why they just kind of tried to continue that strategy in the comic book industry, and it didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work wasn't just lousy comics or something. The reason why it didn't work was Heroes World was only set up to sell really in the New Jersey and the tri-state area. And when they tried to roll it out nationally and set up thousands and thousands and thousands of individual retailer accounts, it was much more than Heroes World had the infrastructure to do. I don't know who assessed that transaction, but they should be slapped because they should have known that there's no way Heroes World was going to be able to do that. So now DC Comics is kind of coming out. All the major publishers are kind of left to decide to what they want to do on their own. Diamond has very limited authority with them. So Diamond does have an exclusive distribution agreement with DC Comics. However, that's for non-returnable sales, and that's specifically to the direct market. It's not for their bookstore sales. Image does have a bookstore deal with Diamond, and Diamond has a separate distribution entity of theirs they control for bookstore sales. And Image Comics is exclusive to Diamond's bookstore sales, which can be significant because it includes the Walking Dead books and things. But DC Comics has other relationships with other distributors that they handle for other formats of their publications. So what DC Comics is obviously doing here is it's not about really hustling periodicals where you're going to have like 1,000 comics from a bunch of different titles combined shipping to some small store in Arkansas. It's about saying, hey, let's get some of these comic book stores set up with some of our other distribution options that already exist, such as their bookstore options. So that's the kind of stuff they talk about, but they're not really being clear about it. Clearly, DC Comics is not setting up a whole national distribution infrastructure for the 1,900 comic book stores, which is about the total of what's left as of about a month ago. They're not concerned about doing that because first of all, if it was possible to throw that together overnight, they would just do it in cooperation with Diamond. Diamond didn't screw anything up here. This isn't Diamond's fault. And Diamond has all the infrastructure and has all the accounts established and all the paperwork and knows all the history of everyone to deal with. They know who needs what books and who buys what and who's struggling and who's doing well and who needs what help. Diamond has all that information already. So it's not like DC is trying to recreate Diamond comic distributors. One other thing that DC might be considering is allowing sub-distributors. There used to be sub-distributors. So what that means would be this. A small operator would buy extra copies of books that maybe he would sell in his store, or maybe he would just be focused on reselling those comic books to other local comic book stores, sort of like group buying. So there used to be subscriptions. They would also get comics out in like 7-Elevens and some other places that were, they would buy them at say 60% off a cover price and then resell them for 30% off a cover price. They may allow sub-distributors back. There are a couple of major retailers that do have relationships with other retailers or buy enough volume to consider that. That's a possibility if it was simple to be done. But I don't expect DC to be distributing periodical comics anytime soon, really, or creating a whole new distribution system, because comic book stores have become a smaller and a smaller part of their distribution as time has gone on. There are other major competitors to comic book stores. MyComicShop.com is owned by Buddy Saunders, who used to own Lone Star Comics. He sold his stores, and he's been operating this mail order business, MyComicShop.com, and they do pre-orders of new comics at 35% off. Now, I've talked to Buddy before. He's a great guy. And actually, I will recommend his site if you're interested in back issues as well. They're very reasonably priced. They also have consignments, and they have an incredible inventory of comics, and they have a really good pricing, and great service. They're just nice people. Also, they have consignment services. They have their own auction services, kind of like eBay, but it operates exclusively on their site, which just gives you an idea of how much business they must be doing. And when I talked to Buddy last year and I asked him how business was going, he said, Adam, you know what? Business has been better than ever. It's never been so good for me. And why is that? Well, because he's got a mail order business. So a mail order business is completely scalable. They can do as much or as little business essentially as they want to do. And their costs to service customers is very little. And it's smart for them to sell back issues along with pre-order issues. So how is a comic book store in Texas supposed to compete with Buddy's MyComicShop.com when he's selling at 35% off of pre-orders of retail of cover price, and the local comic store is going to sell for what to make what profit, to make what difference? It's hard to even compare. And the other issue is because he's selling back issues, he buys truckloads, closeouts, things like that. He knows where he can get comics incredibly inexpensively. May not be on, the day one, he's not buying a truckload of comics for whatever, a penny a pound, or whatever the heck they're buying them for these days. But week 2 after new comics come out, people are looking to liquidate comics, and Buddy always has cash to buy. So very reputable, great company, but they're competing along with eBay against comic book stores, and Buddy is not the only big mail order operator. There's Mile High Comics, higher priced, very pricey on back issues, Mile High Comics, but they have bills to pay as well. But I would get my comics from mycomicshop.com. I usually do if it's looking for backlist issues, although I have gotten some from Mile High Comics. But then there's also other operators that are discounting this frontlist stuff, where basically they're selling the pre-orders as almost like a loss leader. They make a little money on those, but they want a relationship with comic book customers so that they're able to sell their back issues, which are very high profit. Mile High Comics also buys truckloads of closeouts. How is a local retail store supposed to compete with a mail order operation like this? They really can't. So what's the future for comic book stores? Well, look, a lot of comic book stores are going to close. A lot of comic book stores are going to close. I would suggest that most comic book stores are going to close. I've heard some estimates as little as maybe 20% of stores will close. I think it's going to be more like 80% of stores, and I'm not trying to scare anybody by that. But look, here's what I look at as an example. So this is from Zero Hedge. It's a financial news blog, and they reproduce articles. This is from Restaurant Dive, which is an industry publication for the restaurant industry. And quoted from this, the industry has never experienced anything like this before. 3% of all restaurants have already closed permanently. 3% of all restaurants have already closed permanently? It hasn't even been that long. It's like, yeah, but they're terrible times right now. Stores are closed. Business is closed. A lot of people can't even, go shop in their state because shopping is against the law, essentially, to physically go into a shop, not to buy online. You can buy online as much as you want, but to walk into a store and browse, you're not supposed to do that in most states because of all the lockdown stuff going on right now. So check this out. 3% of restaurants have already permanently closed due to the coronavirus crisis, according to research from the National Restaurant Association. The National Restaurant Association. Yeah, what is that? It's a joint group and association that restaurants belong to that talk about like what's going on in their industry. 44% of operators have temporarily closed their restaurants, almost half. 11% anticipate they will permanently close within 30 days. 11% anticipate they will permanently close. Now, that means how many of them, don't even anticipate they're going to have to close. Maybe they're just wishful thinking. But things tend to work out worse than we think. So I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm just trying to say realistically, if it's going on with restaurants that 3% are closed and 11% are expecting to close within 30 days, that's 14% right there. So how many comic book stores are going to close? Probably a lot. And a good amount could depend on what Diamond is able to do with the permission of the well-financed publishers. Marvel is obviously part of a billion-dollar company. DC Comics is part of a billion-dollar company. Image is offered to do returnable comics. DC has recently offered to do some returnable comics. But they need to do a lot more. The problem with the comic book industry is that the business is not a good business anymore. It's just not a good business to run a comic book store. So it's a hobby shop. So how crucial are these hobby shops to exist? I mean, that's up to the major publishers with the billions of dollars to decide. You could give loans. They could give loans directly to comic book stores. They could give free comics. They could accept anything back returnable that was published within the last 12 months and give them a financial credit for that. They could do comic books on a returnable basis. But the core problem with comic books right now in comic book stores and why they've been dying out is because the content is something people aren't excited about. There is way, way too much of the SJW. We want to change what it means to be a hero. So we're going to destroy, the Star Wars move of we're going to destroy whatever the most popular series is with some other version of it that aligns with someone's most recent politics. Customers aren't interested in giving donations for political purposes. They want entertainment that's worth the money. They want comics that are worth the money. And if people don't produce those, if publishers don't produce those and create excitement about the actual product, then reselling that product is a terrible business. Imagine if you were a restaurant and someone supplies you with food that maybe it's good for you, even if it was good for you, which SJW comics are not. But even if they were good for you, if they don't taste good, they're not going to shop there. They're not going to buy that. No one's going to consume that. And that's the problem comic stores are facing. So there's a lot of ways of resuscitating comics. But the first issue has to be, number one, content. People have to be enthusiastic about going to the store and getting that content. If that means you're allowed to have certain kinds of heroes and other kinds of heroes, whatever it takes, people have to be driven to want to be at that store every week. If this coronavirus problem happened 30 years ago, Ethan Van Sciver was talking about this the other night in the early 1990s, and it meant that shops had to close down for 3 months. Nobody would even question for a second that there wouldn't be people lined up to see the latest issue of Spawn. But there's so many books that people don't look forward to. There's so many comics that get left unsold because they're political statements as opposed to entertainment. People just don't care about them, not nearly as much as they used to. And that's the problem with the industry is you can't fix this industry. You can't fix these comic book stores. You can't keep them open. You can't expect new ones to open unless they have a product that somebody wants, unless they make it into a good business. So rule number one is the content has to improve to the standards of what the customers want. This is my project, College of the Dead Graduation Day. My College of the Dead Graduation Day comic right now is running at more than I don't even know, 200 or 300% of what the first issue did, because the first issue was good and we delivered it. So people are anticipating the second one and they're telling their friends about it. That's the kind of success that we need. Now, DC Comics is closed down. Their printer closed down for 3 weeks. Their printer is a company called Transcontinental Printing. They're based in Canada. They're a very successful, large company. They're like a $2 billion company that run about 20 different printing plants. They print every kind of imaginable thing. And they do a beautiful quality job. But the government has required them, government of Canada has required them to close their facilities for 3 weeks due to the coronavirus problems up there. And they have to close for at least 3 weeks. So this is pushing delivery back multiple weeks. There are other printers that are open. Mixam, who has printed a lot of comic books for independent publishers, Comicsgate guys, they did a beautiful job of quality and they've delivered. They are still open. They are printing out of Illinois, the United States, as well as the UK. And they're printing, and they actually need business right now. I was talking to them last week. They said, hey, we need business. They have a price calculator on their site. You just go to Mixam and you click on products, and they do multiple products. You can select whatever's of interest of you and see what their pricing is. Transcontinental Printing will be back printing. They're not going anywhere. I don't know if it's going to be in 3 weeks. They don't know if it's going to be in 3 weeks. They're going to comply with whatever the government regulations are. They are printing some things that are considered essential. Medical information, I think some newspapers, they were telling me, and a few other things. But they'll be back open. I don't know why Mixam is exactly allowed to print and they're not allowed to print. Frankly, who knows? It'll clear up in a few weeks. In the meantime, DC is supposedly sourcing other printers to print their books. They can find other printers, but a lot of them are all under the same kind of rules. But the issue is really not who's going to print the books. The issue is really, are you going to make good books so that, even as these comic book stores would close, new ones would open because they want to be selling those fantastic books that everybody has to have? I mean, probably no. Probably no. Probably there are going to be a hell of a lot less stores. Diamond Comic Distributors is not going to go out of business, but they're going to be shipping a lot less new comics. But the industry has been moving away from comic books since the early 1990s. They started putting in more things like posters and T-shirts and other kinds of books and other kinds of collectible merchandise and things like that, and toys and games. And a lot of stores sell more than just comics, but the stores that expect a chunk of their business is going to come from comics are definitely going to be suffering with even getting product to sell, product that really there's a lot less people enthusiastic about the comic books they're producing now to the standards they're producing now versus what they were producing even just 5 or 10 years ago. And we'll see how that goes. As I mentioned before, my current project is College of the Dead. It's going very well. It's a zombie apocalypse story. And it continues from College of the Dead Book 1. And I love it. It came out terrific. It's going to be shipping in June 2020. It's not going to be in comic book stores. It's only coming out through crowdfunding. I mean, nothing's probably going to be in comic book stores, right? So that's why people are supporting it. And recently, I announced the creation of these 2 books as part of the campaign as well. A 100-page ashcan, which shows you how he made the book, and a 260-page art book that shows you each panel, one panel at a time, because this art was done, all art's done one piece at a time, but the book is 260 individual panels, and that makes up what the whole book is. And it's really also came out fantastic. The artist Javier Aranda did an amazing job. And we're also well on the way to producing College of the Dead Book 3, Spring Break. That will be announced fairly soon. And that book will be shipping in January of 2021. I produce all these books first, and then I offer them to backers and get their support, because I like being able to ship on time and make it easy to deliver all of our books. It's great to not have to hassle around and trying to get a book done. All right, so go ahead and make sure you're subscribed. Click the bell for notifications. I will be back soon with another video, and if I don't see you, I will miss you.